They told me to sit down and shut up at my own husband's estate dinner. Said I was just the widow, like I hadn't built every piece of this family from scratch. I smiled, stood up, and left without a word. They laughed when the door closed behind me. But by the time the sun came up, their accounts were frozen, their homes were locked, and everything they thought was theirs was legally mine. And I wasn't done yet. Before we start, please make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this, and also comment where you're watching from. Thanks. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and apparently to my own family, that means I'm just the widow now. I ironed my blouse twice before leaving, checked my lipstick 3 times, and told myself not to cry no matter. What? It was just dinner. Just my family. Just the people I'd loved and raised for over 4 decades. We were meeting at my son Blake's house, the big glassy one he and Candace bought after Henry and I co-signed the loan. Not that anyone ever mentioned that anymore. They said we were gathering to talk about estate things, which I assumed meant the house, the lake property, and the retirement accounts. All things Henry and I built from the ground up while eating canned soup for lunch and skipping vacations for 20 years straight. I brought a blueberry pie because Henry always said it was my best, and I thought maybe it would soften the mood. When I walked in, no one looked up. Blake was already pouring wine like a host at some damn Napa Valley tasting, and Candace, in her gold heels and glassy fake smile, was clicking around the kitchen like she owned the place. Their oldest, Jack, gave me a nod, the kind you give someone you vaguely remember from a funeral. The air was sharp with passive-aggressive perfume and something burning in the oven. We sat down, 9 of us, at the table I bought them last Christmas. Blake opened with, "We've been thinking it's best if we simplify things," and I knew exactly what that meant. Less of me, more of them. When I asked gently, carefully, "Have you spoken to the lawyer about the trust?" Candace didn't even look up from her phone. She just muttered, "You're just the widow, Eleanor. Maybe just stay quiet for now." The room went silent. Then Blake chuckled, and so did Trevor, my other son, like it was some sitcom punchline. My hands shook under the table, not because I was weak, but because the weight of that moment hit like a death all over again. Except this time, I was the one being buried. I looked at them all, one by one. Their eyes glazed over like I was a placeholder, not a person. I set my fork down, stood up, and said nothing. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of tears or speeches. I left the pie on the counter, untouched. I walked to my car, locked the door, and for the first time in 43 years, I let the silence inside feel like peace, not loneliness. They didn't even call after me, and they had no idea what I was about to do. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute, just sat in Henry's old brown recliner, wrapped in the same throw blanket we used to argue over on cold nights, the one with the frayed edges and the faint coffee stain he never noticed. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and I just kept playing their words over and over in my head. "You're just the widow. Maybe just stay quiet," like I was some extra in my own family's life. Around 2:30 in the morning, I stood up because I couldn't take the stillness anymore and walked barefoot across the hall to the cabinet we never let the boys touch. We used to call it the no-go drawer, where we kept passports, titles, old wills, tax stuff, and things they didn't need to know about. My hands were cold when I pulled it open. I had no idea what I was looking for, maybe a reminder that I still had a place in this family, that Henry hadn't left me completely defenseless. I pushed aside the familiar papers, the insurance stuff, birth certificates, an old photo of us in Colorado, and that's when I saw it. A thick white envelope wedged in the back, labeled in Henry's handwriting with one word, Eleanor. I stared at it like it might disappear. Henry wasn't the type to leave sentimental notes. He showed love by making sure the tires were rotated and the gutters didn't clog, not through letters. I opened it slowly, my hands already shaking, and inside was a single page of notebook paper and a stack of clipped documents behind it. The letter said, "If you're reading this, something's already gone wrong. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I knew if I did, you'd try to fix it instead of protect yourself. The boys, they're not bad, but they're selfish, and Candace, she's worse. I saw it happening the moment I got sick. I made some changes. Everything is in your name. House, accounts, the lake property. You have full authority, power of attorney. They don't know. Don't feel bad for using it. Don't let them shame you into silence. And if they ever try to take what's yours, burn it all down. I sat there, frozen, the weight of it sinking in. I had no idea he'd done this. We'd talked in vague terms about the will, but I thought he was just being cautious. I looked through the documents, official, notarized, sealed with our lawyer Alan's stamp, everything legal and binding. There were terms outlined that I barely understood at the time. Financial control clauses, ownership restructuring, and transfer of assets effective immediately upon death. It was all there. Henry had rewritten everything 8 months before. He passed during a time I thought we were just going to doctor's visits and trying new medications. He had done it quietly, with total clarity, probably after seeing Blake sniffing around his business records and Candace asking those strange, smiling questions about next steps. I could practically hear Henry's voice telling me to stay, sharp, to stop underestimating my own power. I made tea just to keep my hands busy, even though I didn't drink it. I paced the kitchen a few times, pulled the documents back out, and double-checked the signature dates. It was real, all of it. And the more I stared at it, the more I felt something shift. That feeling of being invisible, like I was just a tag-along in someone else's legacy, was replaced with something else: control. At 3:47 a.m., I picked up the landline and called Alan Kramer, our lawyer for over 30 years, the one who used to slip Henry fishing magazines during meetings and always called me Mrs. Whitmore even after I told him to stop. He answered after 4 rings, groggy but alert once I said my name. I didn't waste time. I said, "Henry left everything to me. I found the paperwork. I want to activate it today." He paused for a second, then asked if anyone else knew. I told him no, not yet. "Good," he said. "Don't tell them. I'll be there by 9 with everything you need." I hung up and just stood in the hallway, staring at the old wedding photo on the wall. Us on the courthouse steps, young and scared but completely in sync. I touched the frame and whispered, "I've got it now. You don't have to worry anymore." Then I sat back down, folded the documents into a clean manila folder, and placed it in my purse like it was a weapon. Because that's exactly what it was. And if they thought I was going to sit quietly while they carved up my life, they were about to learn exactly what kind of woman they'd pushed out the door. By the time Alan rang the doorbell at 8:57 a.m., I was already dressed, makeup done, hair pinned back the way Henry liked it, with the documents spread across the dining table like a war map, and a notebook filled with questions I'd written in the margins while pacing the night before. He stepped inside with his briefcase and that same worn-out leather folder he'd been carrying since the boys were in grade school, and when he saw the envelope Henry left me, his expression shifted, from professional concern to something closer to grim respect. We spent 2 hours going through every clause, every legal term, every trigger point, and by 11:15 I had signed 6 documents that transferred control of every asset, property, account, and business interest under my name. Alan made the final call to the estate manager, gave them verbal confirmation that all instructions should now come from me, not Blake, not Trevor, not even the trust, just me. It felt surreal hearing him say it out loud. All further authorization rests solely with Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. Then he looked at me and asked, "Do you want them to find out through their accounts, or do you want to call a meeting?" I thought about it for a second, then told him, "Let them feel it. Let it hit like a car crash." He smiled. "Good. That's the Eleanor I remember." And just like that, it was done. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with Henry's brokerage manager, the property firm, the title company, and the accountant, each one confirming that yes, my name was now the only name that mattered. By 3 p.m., I got a text from Blake. "Hey, weird question, but do you know why the cabin account's locked?" I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Candace called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was sharp and sugary, the way it always is when she thinks she's about to manipulate something out of you. By 4:30, the group chat lit up with messages about unexpected account issues, and Trevor, who rarely says anything at all, finally sent, "Did someone change the access on Mom's end?" That's when I knew the panic had started. They hadn't even begun to realize what I'd done yet, but the tremor had hit, and the aftershocks were coming. I waited until 5:05, just as I knew they'd all be back at Blake's for another strategy dinner, and I walked up the stone path with a folder in my hands and knocked on the door like I was just there to drop off a casserole. Blake opened. It, confused, irritated, fake smile barely holding up. I walked in, set the folder on the counter and said, "You all might want to sit down." They didn't. Of course they didn't. Candace leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, and Trevor stayed in the hallway like he might back out. I opened the folder slowly, laid out the documents and said, "This is the new estate plan. Everything is under my name. Everything." There was silence. Not the shocked kind, but the arrogant kind. The kind that thinks it's about to outsmart you. Blake snorted and said, "You can't just move money around without the trust's board." I looked him dead in the face and said, "There is no trust board. Henry dissolved it last year. You didn't read the fine print." Candace stepped forward, trying to scan the papers with her two long nails and her too practiced smile, and said, "There's no way this is binding." That's when I handed her the final document, the notarized copy with Alan's signature and date stamp. She froze. I took one slow step back and said, "This isn't a negotiation. This is a notification, and as of this morning, you have no legal claim to any of it." No one moved. No one spoke. It was the first time in years that room had been quiet while I stood in it. I turned to leave, paused at the door and added, "The next time you want to discuss my future, you'll need an appointment." I didn't slam the door, didn't make a speech, didn't cry. I just walked away and left them standing in the house Henry and I paid for, choking on the control they thought they had. The next morning I was making coffee in my kitchen, the old drip machine sputtering like it always does when it's almost done, and I could already feel the tension building before I even checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Blake, 3 from Candace, and 1 from Trevor, who, predictably, had waited until the storm started before poking his head out. I ignored them all and sat quietly at the table with my mug, watching the steam rise and wondering if they'd even gotten a full night's sleep. Part of me hoped they hadn't. Around 9:12 a.m., Blake finally sent a text that was less aggressive and more confused. "Can we just talk?" That told me everything. They were unraveling. By noon, Alan called to tell me that Blake had tried to access 2 accounts from his business laptop, and both attempts were flagged by the system. I told Alan, "Good, let him dig." An hour later, Candace showed up at my front door uninvited, wearing oversized sunglasses, like I wouldn't recognize her through tinted plastic and lip filler. I didn't invite her in. She stood on the porch like she was delivering bad news to a neighbor she hated. "Eleanor, we're all a little confused here," she started, with that tight smile and that voice she always uses when she's pretending. Not to be furious. Why would Henry do this behind everyone's back? I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Maybe because he knew what you'd do in front of it." She flinched like I'd slapped her. I added, "You should leave. This is trespassing." She tried to throw out some passive threat about lawyers, but I closed the door before she finished. 10 minutes later, Trevor called, voice low like he didn't want his wife to hear him. "Mom, I didn't know about any of this. I thought the trust was just automatic. I didn't even know Candace and Blake were pushing for control." I could hear the guilt, or maybe just the fear of being cut off, and I said, "You had every chance to ask me directly. You didn't. That silence is your signature." He didn't respond, just hung up. That night, I cooked myself dinner for 1. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with lemon, because I was done eating scraps while others feasted off my sacrifices. As I was pouring a glass of wine, the landline rang again, and this time it was Ava, Blake, and Candace's 17-year-old daughter, the only one who ever looked me in the eye during family dinners. Her voice was quiet, almost shaking. "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said something about money being gone and the house being in trouble. Are you okay?" That hit me harder than anything else. I softened. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." She hesitated, then whispered, "I miss Grandpa. He would have hated this." I swallowed hard and told her the truth. That's why he fixed it before it broke. After we hung up, I sat alone at the table, surrounded by quiet, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not grief, not rage, but clarity. Henry had seen this mess coming, and now they were flailing without a safety net. Blake had lost access to the accounts he thought were his. Candace had no legal hold on the house she bragged about to her yoga friends. Trevor was just now realizing that silence didn't mean innocence. And Ava, the only one with any heart left in that family, was caught in the middle. I knew this was only the beginning. People like them don't fold. They scramble, they twist, they look for loopholes. But what they didn't understand yet was that I wasn't some grieving old woman waiting for their approval. I was the firewall now, and if they wanted to challenge me, they'd better come prepared for the next blow. 2 days after I shut the door on Candace and sent that message without saying a word, Alan called again, this time with a tone that made me sit down before he even started talking. "There's something you need to see," he said, and an hour later I was sitting across from him in his office, the same place Henry and I used to go every April to sign papers and drink burnt coffee out of tiny chipped mugs. He slid a folder across the desk without saying a word, and when I opened it, I didn't understand at first. Just a bunch of bank statements, account transfers, loan agreements, all with Blake's name on them. "He used your husband's business line of credit as collateral," Alan said finally. $500,000, maybe more, depending on what's still being uncovered. He signed off on them as a partner, but that partnership was dissolved when Henry passed. Which means these were fraudulent. My hands went cold. I flipped through the papers again, slower this time, watching as dates and figures started aligning. The new SUV Blake bought last year, the sudden remodel of their kitchen, the ski trip in Aspen they told me was sponsored by friends. It was all tied to money that wasn't his, money Blake had no legal right to touch. "He did this while Henry was still sick?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Alan nodded. "We believe so. The first transaction hit 2 weeks after Henry's first surgery." I stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like betrayal, the kind that rots from the inside out. Alan leaned forward and said, "We can press charges if you want, or we can just let the financial noose tighten and watch him squirm. Your call." I didn't respond. Not yet. I needed to sit with it. I drove home without music, without stopping, and went straight to Henry's study, still mostly untouched, and pulled out the old leather journal he kept tucked behind the encyclopedias. That's where he scribbled notes during tax season, and sure enough, on one of the last pages, in his neat slanted handwriting, was a list of things to double-check. Blake's withdrawals, looks fishy. Ask Alan. He must have known. He must have suspected and never got the chance to finish it, and now it was my job to do what he couldn't. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me like puzzle pieces and stared at the proof that my son, my flesh and blood, had stolen from us while we were drowning in doctor visits and chemo side effects. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just made another folder, labeled it Firewood, and started making notes. What assets could I sell? What debts could I call in? What investments could I freeze that Blake might still be attached to? The next morning, I called Alan and told him, "Don't press charges yet. Let him stew. I want him broke before he's scared." That same day, I called the estate accountant, a man named Peter I hadn't seen since Henry's retirement party, and I asked him point blank, "Did you know any of this?" He didn't deny it. I had concerns. "But your name wasn't on anything until now. My hands were tied." I told him, "Well, now they're not. Start talking." And he did, for over an hour. He told me about suspicious fund movements, red flags he couldn't investigate without permission, and how Blake had likely been building up debt under the false belief that when Henry died, he'd inherit everything and could clean it all up afterward. It wasn't just greed, it was arrogance. He never once thought I'd be the one holding the pen when the dust settled. That night, I sent Blake a single message. "You might want to get a lawyer, and an accountant, and a very cheap apartment." I didn't get a reply, but I didn't need one. Because the only thing louder than his silence was the sound of everything he thought was his, slipping straight through my hands. 3 days later, they invited me to the family barbecue like nothing had happened, like we hadn't flipped the family tree upside down and shaken all the rotten pieces to the ground. And while every instinct in me said to stay home and let them eat their lies in peace. I showed up because sometimes silence isn't power. Showing your face is. I wore the pearl earrings Henry gave me for our 30th anniversary and brought a bottle of red wine I knew none of them could afford. Now, when I walked into the backyard, the whole thing looked staged, fake as hell. Plastic tablecloths, forced smiles, and music just loud enough to avoid real conversation. Candace was wearing white like she was trying to prove something. And Blake was behind the grill pretending to be a provider, flipping burgers like the world wasn't burning under his feet. Trevor nodded at me awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if he should be mad or relieved. I didn't wait long. I walked right up to the picnic table, dropped the firewood folder on it, and said, "We need to talk, now." Candace rolled her eyes. Blake muttered something under his breath, and Trevor reached for a beer like a kid trying to avoid a fight. I opened the folder and laid out the documents, the loan fraud, the forged partnership extension, the fund transfers, everything. "This is what Blake did while your father was dying," I said flatly, without raising my voice, because people don't forget what you say. They remember how calm you were when you said it. Blake barked out a laugh and said, "This is ridiculous. That's not even—" But I cut him off. "It's not a guess. It's notarized, confirmed. And the only reason you're not in jail right now is because I'm giving you one last chance to own it." Candace stepped forward, voice shrill and shaky. "This is a setup. He didn't steal anything. Henry would have told us." I turned to her slowly, eyes level, and said, "Henry saw it. He just didn't trust you to fix it." For the first time, she had nothing to say. Ava, who'd been sitting quietly near the fence, looked at me with wide eyes like she was finally seeing the cracks in everything she'd been told to believe. I turned back to Blake and said, "You'll start signing things over today. The vehicles, the cabin furniture, the business inventory. You don't get to enjoy the pieces of what you tried to destroy." Blake clenched his jaw, chest heaving, and said, "You're going to burn the whole family down over some paperwork?" I leaned in slightly and said, "No. You did that when you stole from your father's grave." That shut him up. I turned, walked toward the back gate, and heard someone, probably Candace, mutter, "You're bitter, that's all you are, a bitter old woman who couldn't let go." I stopped, didn't turn around, and said just loud enough for everyone to hear, "No, I'm the woman who paid for this entire yard, and I just decided you're not invited back into it." Then I walked through the gate and didn't look back. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of that wine and sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees, wondering how it was possible to feel grief and power at the same time. I wasn't happy, but I was free. And freedom, it turns out, tastes a hell of a lot better than forced smiles and stolen money. The following Monday, I met with the real estate attorney and gave him the list of properties Henry and I still legally owned, the lake house Blake bragged about on Instagram, the downtown condo Trevor had been secretly renting out for under-the-table cash, and even the SUV Candace used to drive Ava to school in while calling it a gift from Blake's hard work, when in reality, the lease had my husband's signature on it, and now, legally, mine. I signed the sell orders one by one, no hesitation. No ceremony, just clean, cold signatures that felt like removing tumors from the body of a family that had stopped functioning years ago. The lawyer asked if I wanted to notify them personally or let the paperwork speak for itself, and I said, "They didn't invite me into the room when they thought they were dividing the kingdom. I'm not giving them a stage now that it's collapsing." By Friday, Blake's business account had been drained of illegal equity. Candace's credit cards were declined at a boutique in Westport, and Trevor called me sounding breathless, asking if the building manager was serious about terminating his lease. "Yes," I said, "and the next person living there will pay rent, like the rest of the world." Candace, of course, didn't go down quietly. She showed up again, this time red-faced, screaming at my front steps like a banshee in designer heels, demanding answers, threatening to expose me for elder abuse, even though I was standing there with better posture, better legal footing, and frankly better skin than she had despite all the injectables. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I just stood there behind the window with the blinds slightly cracked and watched her unravel until she gave up and stormed off. The next morning, I had a locksmith change the locks at the cabin. The day after that, the SUV was picked up from Blake's driveway mid-brunch while his neighbors watched from behind their hedges. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it to reclaim what was mine, what Henry and I built brick by brick while the rest of them watched from the sidelines and waited for the inheritance buffet to open. Ava texted me that night, "Dad is losing it. They're talking about moving in with Aunt Brenda. Is this permanent?" I stared at the screen for a minute before replying, "Actions are permanent, so are consequences." She didn't respond, but I saw her typing and stopping. A few times like she wanted to say more. I understood. She was stuck between the people who raised her and the truth they never wanted her to see. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No dreams, no tossing, just a deep quiet that settled in my bones like peace finally, punching through the noise. When I woke up, I had a new email from the estate's financial advisor confirming that every major asset had been reclaimed, liquidated, or reassigned. The message ended with one sentence I couldn't stop rereading. "You now hold 100% control." And for the first time since Henry died, I actually believed it. I was halfway through my morning toast when the doorbell rang, and before I could even reach the front window to peek, I saw a white envelope slide under the door. No return address, just my name printed in shaky handwriting. At first I thought, it might be from Ava, maybe something handwritten she didn't want to send by text, but when I opened it, what fell out stopped me cold. A copy of a psychiatric recommendation form, unsigned, but marked with an aggressive red highlighter around the words "Capacity Evaluation Recommended." I knew what it was immediately. I'd seen enough of Henry's legal briefs over the years to recognize a setup when I saw one. Someone, and I didn't need a second to guess who, was trying to file paperwork to challenge my control of the estate under the claim that I was mentally unfit. I held the page between my fingers and didn't feel fear, just this cold, slow, burning insult like they'd finally run out of courage and were resorting to cowardice. That afternoon, I drove to Alan's office and dropped the envelope on his desk without a word. He glanced through it, eyebrows lifting slowly, and said, "They actually went this route? That's bold." I nodded once and said, "Trace it. I want to know who ordered the evaluation, who wrote it, and who forged that access." 2 days later, Alan called me back with a voice as sharp as I'd ever heard it. It was Candace. She approached a notary who owed her a favor and tried to backdate the file. "We've got emails." One of the assistants turned it over voluntarily. Apparently, she didn't like being asked to commit a felony on a Sunday morning. I said, "Press charges." He said, "Already in motion." That evening, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled into Blake's driveway while they were loading groceries into the back of a borrowed sedan. The neighbors came out like flies to sugar. Candace screamed and shouted and sobbed like someone who'd rehearsed it 1,000 times, but it didn't stop them from cuffing her on the sidewalk and reading her the charges: forgery, fraud, attempted abuse of the court system. Blake tried to intervene, but the deputy shut him down instantly with a hand on his chest. I wasn't there to see it, but Ava told me later. She said it quietly, like she was ashamed to know them. "She tried to say it was your fault," Ava whispered, but nobody believed her, not even Dad. I told Ava, "Some people don't break. They rot from the inside until there's nothing left but noise." She didn't say anything after that, but I could hear her breathing on the line, and for once, it felt like maybe someone in that house saw through the curtain. That night, I poured a drink, opened the old photo album Henry used to flip through when he missed the boys, and stared at their toddler faces, not because I missed them, but because I needed to remind myself that I loved them once. You don't do what I did out of hatred. You do it because you were the only one who remembered how much was sacrificed to build it all. And if protecting that meant sending one of them to jail, so be it. Candace had bet everything on the idea that I'd fold, that I'd feel embarrassed, or weak, or too old to fight. She didn't realize I stopped being afraid the day they told me to sit quietly like a shadow in a room I paid for. Now I was done being polite, and this time I was going to finish the job. The courthouse hearing for Candace's arraignment was short and brutal, just like the damage she tried to cause, and I didn't even bother attending. Alan sent me a message after with 3 words that said it all. She took a deal. I didn't need details. I knew Candace would never risk trial, not with digital records tied to her personal email and witness statements from the notary's assistant, who gave a sworn deposition in exchange for immunity. The plea bargain meant no jail time, but a permanent record and a fine big enough to rattle their last few months of financial stability. Blake didn't speak to me at all after that, not even to defend her, not even to threaten me. Just radio silence, the kind that lets you know someone's finally realized the ground beneath them is gone. I spent the next week shifting gears. Not out of revenge anymore, but necessity. There were taxes to file, property closures to finalize, and most of all, decisions to make about what this entire fight would mean now that the smoke had cleared. I wasn't going to hold on to every asset like a dragon hoarding gold. That had never been the point. I just wanted what was mine, and what Henry and I built to be protected from rot. So I called Peter, the estate accountant, and told him to transfer ownership of the smaller house outside town, the one with the porch swing and the yellow shutters Henry always said reminded him of his grandma's place, into Ava's name. She didn't ask for it. She didn't expect it. But she was the only one in that whole family who never tried to play me, never looked away when things got hard, and I wanted her to have something that couldn't be twisted or clawed back. She cried when I told her. Not the performative kind either, just soft and shocked, like it broke something loose in her she'd been holding too tightly. I don't deserve this, she said, and I told her, you do, because you didn't. Pretend. That same week, I started working with a nonprofit consultant to launch the Henry Whitmore Second Chance Fund, a grant program for widowed women over 60 who'd been pushed aside, shut out of financial decisions, or left holding the scraps. After their husbands passed, I didn't want a plaque or a ceremony. I just wanted something that lasted longer than pain. The first application came in before the website even launched, a handwritten letter from a woman in Kentucky whose kids had emptied her bank account the day after the funeral. I approved her within 2 hours. One night, while sorting through paperwork, I found an old note Henry had scribbled on a dry cleaning receipt, shoved between pages of his retirement binder. It said, "Make sure Eleanor knows she did it all." I just stood beside her. I didn't cry. I just folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of his desk, where I kept the original will, the keys, and now, peace. By Friday, I had closed the last joint account tied to Blake's fake LLC, donated the remaining inventory to a local business incubator, and sent an official cease and desist to the last law firm still stupid enough to take his calls. The rebuild wasn't flashy. It wasn't fun, but it was mine and Henry's, and no longer weighed down by the greedy ghosts of people who had his blood, but none of his honor. And for the first time, as I sat on my front porch sipping coffee while contractors replaced the rotting fence panels we'd put off fixing for years, I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was rebuilding from the ashes, and I was doing it on my own damn terms. It wasn't until I stood in front of that long, polished table again, the same one they told me to sit quietly at just weeks earlier, that I realized how far I'd come, and how far they'd fallen, and not one. Part of me felt guilty about it. Blake had sent the invitation himself, though he worded it like a casual get-together. Some nonsense about reconnecting and resetting, like this was a technical error or a family glitch we could patch over with burgers and forced apologies. I didn't go to forgive anyone. I went because sometimes the people who try to erase you need to see you standing at full height, no longer asking for permission to exist. Candace wasn't there. Part of her deal with the state involved staying away from me for at least 6 months. And Trevor hovered in the background like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. Ava sat next to me, her hands folded in her lap, calm and watchful, like she was finally learning how to be still in a room full of smoke. Blake stood at the head of the table like it was still his house, still his legacy, but even he looked smaller now, thinner, drained, like he'd finally stopped believing his own story. He started with some practiced line about how families go through storms and weather things differently, but I wasn't interested in his script. I set down my glass, looked at every single person in the room and said, "This isn't a storm, it's the consequence, and every one of you wrote it." You could hear a pin drop. No one reached for their water. No one fidgeted. Blake opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself or throw one more excuse into the fire, but I cut him off with a raised hand and said, You told me I was just the widow, that I should sit quietly, but I wasn't quiet when I built this family. I wasn't quiet when I kept it alive, and I sure as hell won't be quiet now that I've taken it back. I paused, long enough to let that land, then added, this table, this room, I own them. Legally, emotionally, structurally. You're guests here, and remember that. I stood up without waiting for a response, and as I walked toward the door, I turned back one last time and said, you don't have to like me. You just have to understand that I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. Then I left, not because I was angry, but because I was finished. Outside, the sky was sharp and clean, the kind of light Henry used to say was perfect for yard work, and as I got into my car, I didn't feel victorious or smug or even proud. I felt settled. I'd fought the fire and walked through it. And now I got to rebuild not because someone gave me permission, but because I gave it to myself. And that, more than any revenge or inheritance or title, was the win I never thought I'd get, but damn well earned.